Hi guys, it's David Stone, Billericay Boater. Reasons. Today's subject is quite heavy and I'm dealing with it in a quite simple and a brief way. It's the kind of, I think, existential angst, dread that is prevalent in our current cultures, born out of a lack of purpose, a lack of meaning, a lack of direction, a lack of ownership of our existence currently and our potential futures. It's kind of like exemplified or caricatured by the existence of artificial intelligence, which is causing all sorts of palpitations in the body politic and the impact of social media. And between the two, what we appear to be experiencing is a steepening of an already existent sense of isolation and meaningless, a kind of nihilistic um, facet is seeping into our psyche, our popular psyche. Anyway, the classic assertion is that AI is going to take over all our jobs and it's going to be capable of creating everything that we as human beings, Homo sapiens sapien, have been doing for the past 70, 80,000 years, and without labor costs, without, um, striking unions or whatever. And it will do so in a way which is better by miles than what we're capable of doing. And alongside AI and the destruction of jobs and livelihood and purpose, social media now um, absolutely crystallizing the whole kind of capitalist um, drive towards treating everybody and everything as a means to create profit through consumption. To the extent in which we see the growth of incels and isolated young people, disconnected from each other, disconnected from their families, disconnected from society and nature, living predominantly within the domain of social media, Instagram and TikTok and the like, um, measuring themselves against an artificially constructed sense of identity fabricated by companies out to make millions out of selling branded goods, services, and all sorts of um, add-ons, accessories to enhance your appearance, your status, and your sense of personal self-worth. Now, against this backdrop, as it were, this existential nihilistic dread, I've started to discern some powerful kind of counter moves. Initially, it came to me through a conversation I had with my sons, Matthew and Kofi. They were talking about, Matt in particular was talking about not using his phone and not relying upon social media as a means of communication and not listening to the noises constructed and enforced and amplified through amps like TikTok and Instagram, just refusing to participate in it, right? And I use my phone every day, and I'm going to come on to this in a bit, but it's like I absolutely detest Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon. Yeah, I use Amazon all the time. How we see things and how we respond to them are, I think, inevitably uh, full of contradictions. I kind of like intellectually hate the idea of the way animals are treated to provide food. Yeah, I'm a carnivore, um, and I could go into reasons for that, but I'm not going to do it in this occasion. And here, I'm addressing this sense, palpable sense of existential angst and dread, and what I see as the emerging and very, very encouraging, positive antidote to that. And the way I'm going to try and describe this, and indeed not to describe it, promote it, is just something that's kind of like started to chime with me, an idea. And the idea is this thing about the modern village. And I don't see anything that yet captures this idea, so I'm just putting it out there. What I mean by that is the village, the old kind of, if you like, archetype of the village or stereotype of the village. The child is the child of the village, right? Even when I was growing up in Billericay as a kid in the 1950s, it was true that people in the neighbourhood would know who you were, they know your parents. You couldn't get away with stuff without it being communicated back to your parents. And if you were in trouble, somebody on the street would be there to help you out. There was this sense, even in Western democracy at the height of capitalism, where the sense of a village still kind of had a resonance. And then many of our contemporaries now who come from other parts of the world, India and Africa and China and Japan and Jamaica and South America, have strong historical and tribal and cultural senses of the value of the village. The child is the child of the village. But that's largely gone. That kind of idea that you know everybody within your street, your neighbourhood, is gone. But the value of it is still, I think, valid. But we need to recast it, and we need to recast it in a modern context in which we don't have the neighbourhood, the street, the housing area, the village square, the village hall, the village church, the centres or the locus of and focal point for attention and joining up, and where we had our festivals, our fates, and our village cricket games. That kind of stuff is largely gone. I mean, it still exists. I was in um, such a village just a few months ago in East Sussex, and it had all those elements. But I'm talking about recasting this on the basis of a 21st century concept of how we can tackle these problems, the problems of existential angst and dread, partly caused by artificial intelligence, social media, but I think ultimately, I'll talk about this in a different podcast, caused by the rapacious, alienating greed of capitalism. Right? I'm saying it, it's out there. All my kids have told me not to talk about capitalism because everyone makes their living out of it. But fuck it, I don't care. Sorry for my grandchildren if you can hear this. Anyway, the antidote is activities that bring people together in interesting and curious ways that don't rely on social media as a part of the manufacture of the thing, but in which social media play a part in the communication of the thing. That sounds a bit kind of garbled and convoluted, so I'll say what I mean. A few weeks ago, I was at an event in London where I was in a theatre in the middle of town, one of the most famous theatres in London, and it was to listen to a conversation between the former, I think, professor of public understanding of science, biologist, and famous one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, Rich Dawkins, right? And I'm not going to comment on the content of it because it was pretty poor. But in the course of that discussion, listening to him, me and my brother Simon, who were there together, were just making the observation that this was a theatre full. I think it was maybe 4,000 people there, and none of them had their phones on, right? None of them were like looking at their laptops. They were all paying attention to a conversation and they were all listening. And then there were loads and loads of questions being asked. And the questions were being asked using a bit of technology where you put up um, your 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 code, your graphic, you read your reader uh, and your Q reader, whatever, and you submitted a question, and then there was a two-way flow between the questioner and the speaker, Rich Dawkins. But that wasn't the point. It is a point. I think that is a point itself, that there is this thing about a theatre full of people there to hear ideas and a conversation about politics, philosophy, biology, science, meaning, value, spiritualism, Christianity, and all of those subjects are being kind of like discussed. Anyway, in the course of that debate, um, I was talking to two women to my right, and asking them why they were there, and the reason for their being there was quite surprising. They said basically that they're there because they were trying to get experiences that didn't rely on artificial intelligence or social media. That and I'm putting kind of words into their mouth, but I think this is true, and I'll come on to this in those other instances just in a second or two. It was about something authentic, something that wasn't kind of like manufactured, artificial. It wasn't AI. It wasn't like AI now can produce music and poetry and drama. You can say to Claude or ChatGPT, produce me a poem in the style of Wordsworth about Nigel Farage, and it'll do something like, as I was walking one summer's day upon a moor, and factor in something to do with Farage, and it'll do the job. And it's scary, for artists, for musicians, for poets, for writers, for authors. This capability, this faculty of AI to reproduce all the kind of known mores of our common culture is scary. Well, it's scary for some people. Some of us, though, are starting to see cracks in this, and the cracks, I think, are being shown through this term, integrity. Does the thing that you're listening to, you're watching, you're paying attention to, does it have some authenticity about it? And that's quite difficult, because if you're not there seeing it, it's quite difficult. There is, as you probably know, a really famous ABBA event going on at O2 at the moment, which the ABBA characters have been reproduced as avatars, using a form of technology which is beyond imagination, because it's them in their height. They look about 30, and they come on in a hologram, and they sing and they dance. They even talk to the audience. It looks like it's two-way interactive, and thousands of people go every week to watch this completely artificially reconstruction of the ABBA experience. But counter to that, I mean, the opposite of that is all the other things that are going on. For example, I just did a little bit of research before doing this. Theatre attendance across the UK and elsewhere in the West has skyrocketed. I mean, live performances. In London, between 2023 and 2025, theatre attendances have gone up by 30%. Like, what? And me and my brothers went to a show a few weeks ago, the Book of Mormon, and it was absolutely rammed. It was absolutely rammed. Um, I asked ChatGPT or Claude, one of them, to give me an account of the number of live events that are happening in the UK per year. I just wanted to know how many live events were there. I was kind of expecting something like 20,000 maybe. You think about all the small events, the festivals, the shows, the above the pub kind of activities. I was thinking about that sort of number. Turns out in 2025 there were 174,552 live events. Some very small, but some big, like the Hay Festival, the Bristol Festival of Ideas, things like TED Talks. They're all considered to be live events. And then there's small ones in your local theatre. There's even things in local pubs and clubs. Now, interestingly for me, um, as a kind of like aside, my relatives, my grandfather and uncle, from lives in Berlin uh, before the Second World War. Were one of them, Anton Kuh, uh, was a kind of raconteur, a storyteller in pubs in Berlin, and he earned his living doing that. Going to a pub, I mean, in Berlin it's not called a pub, but it's the same kind of thing, and it's where you might get a show on the stage, but you'd have people sitting in there in the spotlight telling stories and having conversations and getting paid for it. And Anton Kuh, who was my great uncle, was one of them. Anyway, then I dug a bit deeper, and I find this kind of explosion of things like flash dance, flash music, and dance events, and this extraordinary thing called choir and a pub choir, and these like venues of several thousands of people turning up just to dance, right? Just to like dance. And then I've got a dear friend of mine, Charlene, who herself is involved in a dance program with people who get together in a hall, learn the moves, and then perform on a stage. And I've seen it through my connections with my partner Jan, this burgeoning of people wanting to be involved in activities that don't depend on technology, yet the activity itself is promoted through technology. Choir, dance events, flash dance, flash mobs, talk evenings, small music venues, outdoor concerts are burgeoning. What does this all mean? I think, but this is just me, Billericay Boater, reasons for an antidote to existential angst and misery and isolation and despair and nihilism is that we are, as a species, at least in the UK, and I think this is happening everywhere else because I've seen evidence of it in Australia, New Zealand, in all the Nordic countries, in Europe, in France, in Spain, in Germany. There's a guy on YouTube that just does dance moves, right? And he goes around the streets. He's so well known now that people recognise him and anticipate his next step, which is show me your dance, and they show him their dance from whatever culture they come from. It's all non-technology in its origins, in its shape and its purpose, but it's communicated by and supported by. And many of these people earn a kind of crust by the number of clicks they get. So this is the rub. I think there is a palpable, strong, positive and enthusiastic alternative to the misery that people see being inculcated by AI and social media. There's a reaction against it, a kind of dynamic, if you like, a dialectic, a response, in the same way as there is a strong response against the whole reform, Nigel Farage, macho, chest beating, xenophobic misogyny that's going on. It's not crystallized yet because it's not There isn't a coherent way of welding it all together. It's all kind of like highly fragmented, disparate, disjointed, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful to watch. I've watched one of these choir events, and I think there were like 2,000 people in the hall, and they were singing a song that was orchestrated by somebody. And what was striking for me was it didn't matter within that setting what religion or no religion, what gender or and then gender, what color, what caste, what disability, what it didn't matter who you were in a sense in terms of how you might choose to identify yourself. And there's a massive problem I've got with this whole identity issue, which I've talked about in another podcast. But it didn't matter. The only criteria for being there was that you wanted to be there and sing. And it was joyful and it was beautiful. I think these threads, which are yet not part of a pattern, are not woven together, have the potential for me to start shaping what I'm going to call the modern village. It means places that we can share, physical places, which aren't technology dependent, but use technology as a means of communication. I do not defer to AI or to social media, but use it as a tool that allow us to express ourselves through music, through theatre, through art, through poetry, through talks and conversations and stories, regardless of who we are or choose to self-identify. This is, for me, a possibility of the 21st century that hasn't been recognised thus far, but there are so many people involved in this. I feel very confident that this podcast is contributing in a very small, very modest, but purposeful way for a new way of being. Later.